Hazard Control Technologies thanks you for joining us on this journey as ESME, the spherical micelle capsulator hero, takes us on another journey around the world. Focusing on the fire and vapor hazards in power generating facilities, this hazards awareness webinar complements other HCT webinars, and we encourage you to submit questions or comments using the chat feature. My name is Bob Taylor, and I am honored to have this time with you on this journey around the world today. We will touch on topics discussing fire and vapor hazards, encapsulator technology, spark some thoughts about to detect, to correct, and to prevent undesired outcomes, talk about specific hazards in power generating facilities, regardless of the type of fuel they are using, and provide a credible and reliable resources for you, the end user. Today's objectives are to better understand the common power generating facility fire hazards, to understand encapsulator technology, to be able to describe the various fire and vapor hazards, and most importantly, to answer any questions. And should you have questions later on, please feel free to reach out to any of us at Hazard Control Technologies, as we would be pleased to support you. This conversation is not just limited to only one type of steam and electric generating facilities, but rather a very broad look at common hazards in biomass and coal and trash and waste and refuge and gas and nuclear and solar and wind and hydro, all the various types of ways that we generate steam and electricity around the world today. We're going to even talk a little bit about some very unique features of all of these that have common ground, and also to guide us through how can we be proactive and do the great things in that. I do remind you that Hazard Control Technologies does offer webinars almost every 2 weeks. We encourage you to sign up for those and reach out to your representative for further information at any time. Well, regardless of the fuel that we are talking about, the most major loss at any given power generating facility, regardless of the type of facility, is most likely going to involve fire and vapor hazards. Many controls and many classes of fires that just bad things happen to good people, and those lives are affected as a result of these. These are the most likely things to happen in power generating facilities, much more than mechanical issues and collapse and electrical issues and even human error to the most part today. Well, the common, very significant hazards in all of these facilities is they're dealing with high voltages and high temperatures and high pressures and fast rotating equipment. They're dealing with a variety of fuels ranging from solid fuels like coal and biomass, to liquids that are under pressure, to liquids that are used for various purposes like fuel oil and mineral oil. They're dealing with combustible metals. And equally as well, today, more and more, we're dealing with unfamiliarity, things that we really don't know and don't understand until often it's way too late. So again, we appreciate you joining us today with the hopes that we enlighten you on some of the hazards and some of the control methods that are available to us. So, wow, this is a really busy screen, but there's so many things going on with steam and electric generating facilities. There's different fuels they operate with, and many of them have more than one. They may be operating off of a solid fuel, but yet they have the various oils and combustible dust and many different hazards out there. There's a lot of specific pieces of equipment, and Hazard Control Technologies offers a great amount of fire and vapor solutions for all of these hazards, for all these types of fuels, for all the power generating facilities. We will briefly touch on today some of the developing hazards that are out there today, dealing with battery energy storage systems and lithium ion. Again, there are separate webinars to dive deeper in those, But we do welcome your questions today and your comments on that. So today we're going to look at a variety of things out there that relate to the hazards that we are all faced with. Well, one thing we got to do, we got to take the brakes for a moment.
You may dial
Begin to think about all of we think about all the different hazards out there and the different conditions.
Or hold to speak with a member services representative.
Okay, somebody has a phone on it. I'm sorry for that interruption. But we have to stop and take a break for a moment and then take a look at what are we really faced with. We know that in any of these given facilities, they're dealing with Class A hazards and Class B hazards, Class C hazards and D hazards and lithium ion and just a variety of the whole spectrum of different classes of fires can be at any given time at any given facility. Again, we're beginning to see the growth of the lithium ion and the battery energy storage system hazards that are going to be huge, and we're on the leading edge. But we also know that over the years, we've kind of grown accustomed to some of the extinguishing agents that are very common for us. We know that we've used water, and it's probably one of the more common agents that we use with some degree of attempts to cool things. And then there's carbon dioxide that typically is used on Class B and C fires. Not the most effective. It predominantly temporarily takes away the oxygen, but once the oxygen's back, there we go again. So it's not the most effective in most conditions. And many of us over the years have seen the development of dry chemical. Dry chemical has become, at one time, was the wonder of the world, but yet today you'll be exposed to the best wonder of the world, and that is the encapsulator technology. But dry chemical predominantly interrupts a reaction. Then there's dry chemical and dry powder. Dry powder is predominantly known, at least in the United States and North America and other areas, for Class D, the combustible metal fires. And often it kind of crosses over and simultaneously used for other types of fires. But it's really those combustible metal fires, the titanium and the magnesium and those things. Then there's foam. We'll talk briefly about firefighting foam, predominantly for one-dimensional or spill-related or in-depth related fires for combustible liquids and flammable liquids. It makes bubbles, and those bubbles build a blanket. And when that blanket's kept fully over, it might help in the suffering of the taking away the oxygen, and very, very limited cooling effect. But it really doesn't have the oomph that many of us over the years have thought that it really does have. And today we're faced with the hazards of health, with the different issues dealing with cancer and the fluorines and so forth. But the great news is encapsulator technology does not have those fluorines. In fact, we're actually a proactive way to help support everyone's health in that. And then there's also wetting agents out there. We think of wetting agents more used by the wildland firefighting, where they're adding an agent for Class A types of fires. But the most important thing of today is understanding that F500 encapsulator technology really brings us to the future. And it deals with all of these different classes of fire. It deals with all of those. One agent, one for one, one for all. And it deals with it on every molecular level possible. And it deals with it with dealing with all of those, from the cooling to the encapsulating to the chemical reaction. What else out there today that can do all for and can do all the different legs of a fire tetrahedron. So let's talk briefly about encapsulator technology, if you will. As we all understand over the years, it's been drilled into us. There's certain things you need to have a fire. And the way that we prevent fires, and as important, the way that we put out fires, is by removing at least one leg or one part of that fire tetrahedron. We have to have fuel, and we look around today and we see, geez, we're surrounded by fuel. There's all different types of fuel around us today. And fire is a little bit like human beings. It's got to have oxygen. And if we take away the oxygen from a fire, we can suffocate it. And over time, it can die. We take away the heat from a fire. It also can help in the extinguishment and the prevention of it. But we also know that all fuel and oxygen together will burn it if it just gets hot enough. Everything's capable of burning. And then we got those free radicals, those that are floating all over there. And again, the encapsulator technology works on each one of these on a very molecular level, unlike any other type of extinguishing agent out there today. So is it new? Nah, it's been around for 2 decades. And Hazard Control Technologies does hold a patent as a water additive. It has extremely superior cooling properties. It works on, again, the various classes of fire, including lithium ion batteries. It works extremely well on pressurized and 2 and 3D fires, dealing with both hydrocarbon-based fuels and polar solvents and ethanol and so on and so forth. And it is actually marketed, as you've heard already, under the name of F500 encapsulator agent. It really is the technology of today and of tomorrow and the future and that. So what really is encapsulator technology? It is actually a form of a water additive, but its basic building blocks are the spiracil micelles. And these are very capable of encapsulating carbon molecules, both polar and nonpolar, as well as hydrocarbon liquids and vapor molecules. Again, it separates the fuel from the oxygen on a very deep chemical molecular level that's not done with other types of agents today in the market. If you wanted to know what's the source of knowledge a little bit, is the National Fire Protection Association is a recognized international authority on fire and life safety. And there is a standard known as an FPA 18A that defines the minimum requirements for a water additive used to control and suppress Class A and Class B fires, to mitigate flammable and combustible vapors. And it's really sets the criteria of how things are currently being tested. I will tell you, just kind of a little secret, is being a member of many NFPA technical committees and serving as a chair on one of them, I realize that these standards are always in a continual improvement mode. They're being updated to the latest and the greatest. And NFPA 18A is, I believe, coming out very soon, within the year or so, with some very powerful revisions, and truly will embrace the things that we're talking about today and reinforce the credibility of all that we talk about today.
Encapsulator technology, the next generation of fire and hazard mitigation. First, we start with a simplified version of a single encapsulator agent molecule consisting of a hydrophilic polar head which loves water, dissolves in water, and a hydrophobic nonpolar tail which fears water and will do anything to get away from water. Once the EA molecules enter the water, they instantaneously and automatically orient, with the nonpolar tails inward and the polar heads outward, forming millions of spherical micelles. Micelles travel towards and exit the nozzles, forming EA droplets. Micelles nearest to the surface of each droplet automatically break apart, The nonpolar tails orient outside the droplet with polar heads on the surface, forming an EA skin on the surface of every droplet. In addition to the EA skin, there are millions of molecular spherical micelles within each droplet.
So as the video shared, that gives you a very good overview of the molecular characteristics, with the polar head that loves water, soluble in water, dissolves in water, and the nonpolar tail that hates water and it fears it. It's non-soluble, but it does not dissolve. And those two, while appear to be opposites, work in harmony together to do wonderful things, again, on that chemical and that molecular level. So F500 encapsulator agent is actually introduced into water with the hydrogen, oxygen molecules. It's introduced in there through various ways, whether through an inductor, whether it's batch mixed. It's introduced and mixed at different percentages, from as down to 0.5% on up to 3 and sometimes even 6, but rarely at 6. And there forms the solution. When it comes together, those nonpolar tails align inward and they form those millions and millions and millions of micelles in that. So we do realize that it is much more powerful in the ability for thermal conveyance. It's very highly efficient, whereas water alone does more in the area of steam conversion and not necessarily the most efficient, especially when it's compared to the encapsulator agent. And that, again, it creates that thermal circuit. Heat's driven into the internal portion, those millions and billions of those micelles into those droplets, and the heat is basically drawn in there and very rapidly reduced in the fire condition. Where water, again, it's only got a slight steam conversion process. Therefore, we tend to use lots and lots of water to accomplish something, whereas we can use much less using the F500 encapsulator agent. Again, working on that chemical molecular level to accomplish all the different tasks much sooner, much faster, and much safer and healthier as well. And that it also does have the ability to encapsulate vapors, the hydrocarbon vapors, often the areas that are the products that provide for the combustion that take place. Again, removes that health issue, removes that flammability and combustibility issue. Again, provides for a healthier and better responsible environment around all of us in that. So the encapsulator technology does have some unique fire suppression mechanics. It reduces surface tension, it saturates those wetted areas, it increases and moves around the surfaces, especially very porous surfaces, much, much, much more efficient. It has that very rapid heat reduction. It can go from 1200 degrees Fahrenheit down to 120 degrees very, very rapidly, and before you really realize it, because it has that ability to absorb many more times that heat than just plain water does. And in doing so, it also builds back that resistancy for burn back. It creates a encapsulation or a cocoon, a chemical cocoon around liquid and vapor, which locks it up and renders it non-flammable. It interrupts that free radical, again, because it is working on the chemical and very molecular level. It works very efficiently and very quickly on that radical energies and that. And what does that really mean at the end of the day? It also means it reduces the toxicity of the smoke and the soot. It reduces the smoke. You'll often see hydrocarbons that have a very deep black, powerful smoke go to white very quickly, which is your water vapor and such, and encapsulate that. Improves the visibility, improves the air quality, and it also improves the water runoff from an environmental responsible environment as well. So when we look at some different items, we look at wetting agents. Wetting agents fall under the guidance of NFPA 18. They are predominantly used because they do have the reduction in surface tension. In other words, they can spread and penetrate, often why they use it much in wildfires. It does have heat reduction. Even though it's the same mechanics as water, it does convert the H2O to steam and does that a little bit more efficiently, but not as efficiently as what F500 encapsulating does with incorporating and capturing the heat and rapid reduction. Then we deal today with foam. Well, foam really flows across the surface of a liquid or even sometimes Class A materials that forms a blanket. The quality of the blanket means everything because it's separating the fuel from the oxygen to smother out that fire. But if that blanket gets interrupted or it gets pulled off, then all the conditions are back on the table for the fire to involve and worsen. The blanket insulates and traps in the heat within. It sometimes is actually counterproductive to heat reduction in some cases, requires maintenance and separation for a period of time for that heat can slowly dissipate. Again, slows the progress down and puts people sometimes at risk because we want to walk through blankets and get the fire out, just the nature of our ability to be reactivity and not understanding that we may be interrupting that blanket and be engulfed. And then the wonders of encapsulating agent. And again, it falls under the criteria of NFPA 18A as an atom. Again, rapidly surface tension reduction, encapsulate the fuel and the vapor molecules, renders those non-flammable, non-ignitable, changes the heat reduction mechanics of the water droplet. It's much, much faster than plain water, much, much faster than wetting agents and especially foams. It also interrupts the free radicals. And again, it's working on all legs of the fire tetrahedron where others only work on one, maybe two at the most. So it really becomes, in most mindsets, it's really the third category of extinguishing agents and encapsulating agents out there today. Good for Class A fires, for two-dimensional fires, for the Class B two-dimensional fires, for gas, diesel, ethanol-based fuels, for 3D fires, for Class K fires, Class F fires. Wow, it works on about everything. It works on everything we have in steam and electric generating facilities. It works on the solid fuels like coal and biomass and human waste and trash and rubber tires and wood and all those things. It works on transformers and the turbine lube oil fires, and it works on those flowing and spraying fires and flange fires and pressurized fires that often happen even with turbine lubricating oil or boiler feed pump systems. We know that through testing, it can be safely used with some training and knowledge on electric related fires. There have been others, but more recently, the FDNY and Con Ed worked in harmony together to do testing and have developed some great guidelines on how to safely do that. But again, like many things, it requires some knowledge. It requires some training in that. Class D fires involve magnesium, lithium-ion batteries, and titanium, and so forth. It works across the variety of agents out there. And that. And again, we know that it works very well on flammable liquid spill control. It is the only agent that is actually proven. It is the only agent that is actually proven to work on lithium-ion batteries without reignition, and with,
Sí,
again, it's recommended on transformer fires and others.
sí,
Well.
yo quería hoy justamente ahora mostrarles, bueno, la
If you
presentación
would,
que
would
tengo
you
de lo de
mute
baterías
your
al grupo, así que ahora a las 4
microphone,
ahí
please?
tenemos presentación, así que a ver si la engancho por ahí. Algo para destacar, no sé, mi idea era recorrer el PowerPoint que nos pasaste, ¿no?
Victor, I don't know if you can
Clareza.
hear, but I believe your microphone
okay.
might be turned on. If you could mute it, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Bien, ¿no?
So we're going to talk a little bit about detect, correct, and prevent for a moment here. Detect, correct, and prevent. The focus is for continual improvement. So many of you are on the call today, and we appreciate it because you're proactive. You want to learn. You want to be able to detect the conditions that you may have, the vulnerabilities, as well as look at how can we make those leaps of improvement for people's health and safety, for the environment, and for business sustainability as well. So as we talk today, we begin to drive our minds into say, I recognize I have hazards. How can I correct those hazards? How can I be prepared for them? How do we respond to those? But that is all part of our efforts to prevent and to do so extremely well in each of those areas. You know, this kind of reminds me of a comment. And as we know, yesterday in the United States was Memorial Day, and it brought me back to thinking about my father and my grandfather, both of them firefighters. My father was an active firefighter for 58 years, and 38 of those years he was chief of the department. He often talked about those buckets of foam that were kept in the equipment room. And he said one time to me that, boy, that stuff's expensive, that foam. And I hope we never have to ever use it. But we have so many different industrial sites in our area, and we have the airport, and we have fighter jets that have crashed in our area. We've had all these various hazards out there that we have it, but you know, it's something that we hope that we never have to use. But should we ever have to use it, his next question was, geez, I hope we got enough of it. And I think some of us honestly have experienced that before, where something's gone wrong and we didn't have enough, and we were scrambling around to get more and more and more. And that, so part of the thought process is we begin to challenge ourselves. Are we proactive? Do we really have what we need? And we go back and look at it. Geez, instead of having to carry all these different agents in hopes that we never have to use it, instead of having all that and all that money we spend on stocking and buying all of the different things, and now we deal today with a thing called human performance, where we try to put barriers in place for people don't make mistakes, especially if they're not familiar. And we have a lot of people in power generation today that are leaving, retiring, and new are coming in. And we have lots of new hazards out there in the world today that are introduced into our facilities. And are we really understanding those hazards? And have we put barriers in place to reduce the likelihood? And I know if he was here today, he'd be just ecstatic that, geez, there's one agent, F500 encapsulator agent, that can do everything that we need it to do on all those classes of fire, and to do it with less than what everything else requires. Isn't that pretty good stuff? He would be pretty enthused about that. In fact, he'd be jumping to joy, because again, it works on everything. You don't need a lot of it. It's better for firefighters' health. It's responsible for the environment. And wow, you can't buy anything better than an F500 encapsulating agent. And you certainly are going to save money than buying a bunch of other things to work on various types of fires. I've always wondered something. How is it that we can always find money during a crisis that we didn't have before? Just a question. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, as we're going to get into this today, we're going to talk about some different common hazards. Again, this is pretty much covering the gamut of the different types of fuels that we're using in power generation today. We're going to talk about fuels and bulk storage of them. Briefly about combustible dust. There was a really good presentation webinar not very long ago on combustible dust, and that's available for your viewing. We'll talk a little bit about materials handling and pressurized oils and transformers, and again, energy storage systems, even though we've had some webinars on that, but it is something of great importance as a developing technology. And to be able to prevent and get ahead of all of that, it's pretty important to understand the values behind the F500 encapsulating agent technology. As we talk about fuels today, we're going to talk about coal, the various ranks of coal. You can think about wood products and biomass. You can think about the refuge plants with all the trash that's in there. And you know, some places are actually taking human waste now and burning it as a form of fuel and handling it. You begin to think about it even on a broader base outside of power generation, but geez, there's all kinds of fuels out there, from the agricultural products to you name it. There's just a lot of fuels and bulk materials that are out in our world today. And that, as we watch this video, I think the important thing to understand that while this happens to be at a power generating facility, having the resources in place, both in emergency preparedness as well as response. But a little bit of coal dust built up on the generator.
Hey Bob, hang on 1 minute because we got a lot of static in the back there.
Caught on fire. Fortunately, somebody took a video that can share with us. There's a lot of them. You do know that little air movement can create a lot of fire quickly, and fire spreads a little bit. Now spread the roof. Before it's over with, someone dies, others are injured. 4 generating units are no longer creating and performing power any longer. And how sad that is. A little bit of something undetected, no one corrected it, and there was no effort to prevent it. And at the end of the day, in that. Again, as we talk about fuels and bulk materials, we talk about coal and biomass, the wood-based products, the pet coke, the activated carbon. Oh, yes. Did you know activated carbon being used in our facilities today to capture mercury control, is a combustible material? There are some facilities that are using briquettes or charcoal briquettes as a way to generate heat to turn the water into steam. There's refuge, as we talk about trash plants. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there's the waste facilities where they actually take sewage after it dries, convey it, and get heat value out of it, as well as some of the methane and other related gases in that. There's liquids that are often petroleum-based in our facilities, whether it's for fuel oil, for starting up or running generators, to lubricating oils, to mineral oils, predominantly transformers, to diesel fuel for heavy equipment, diesel fuel sometimes again for fueling and starting fires for the boilers and that. There's the gaseous and the vapor issues dealing with natural gas being used, propane, there's hydrogen, there's carbon monoxide, which is high enough concentration as an explosive gas. And again, the developing criteria today is the lithium ion and the battery energy storage systems out there today. And again, F500 encapsulator technology works on all of these on that molecular level. One agent helps with everything, dealing with multiple levels of the fire tetrahedron. We know that when we talk about bulk materials or fuels, again, across the board, they're often brought into the facility where they are stored, whether in a pile, sometimes in a barn, sometimes in domes. Sometimes it's for long-term and sometimes it's for short-term. And we know that the protocols that we use to do that often make it very important in the area of the prevention of the fire, the spontaneous combustion, whatever. Those materials are often transferred through chutes, put in bins, hoppers, silos, and temporarily move through those. Again, all bring unique hazards to them. It's transported on conveyors. It's brought to places by ships and barges and by rail. It's moved around by mobile equipment. All of these present hazards within the facility that can be managed and can be managed well. But equally as important, also provide us the ability to use one extinguishing agent, namely the F500 encapsulator technology, on everything, and to do so with efficiency and do so with the least amount of harm to the environment and to people. You know, as we look at hazards management, we begin to recognize from the time it arrives to the facility through its handling to its final destination of conversion, the hazards deal often with fire and explosion. Again, the two most likely things to happen in a steam electric generating facility. And again, with most of them, they do have a level of combustible dust associated with them, whether it's biomass, whether it's coal, whether it's rubber, whether it's refuge. They all bring in that additional complicated hazard to the table. We know that bulk material stockpiles, if they're not well maintained, if it's not detected and corrected in efforts to prevent it, over time they can spontaneous combust, and there we have other problems that develop from them. Again, we also know that with bins and bunkers and hoppers and silos, that those generally are in enclosed areas, and sometimes they get stagnant material in there, and they got the fines and the big parts and the various shape forms, and they cause traps, and sometimes they're inactive, and you get cavities in them that collapse and cause all kinds of dust, and in those cavities accumulate carbon monoxide. Again, at the right concentration, it can become an explosible dust, and boom, bad things happen at those times. We know in the ideal world, we would love to see things that are called mass flow, that the materials just flow right through those bins, bunkers, silos, hoppers. But the reality is often they're going to have stagnant areas. And those stagnant areas become our problem, because that's where we get the old material meets the fresh material, and over time spontaneous combustion occurs, and thus we have fire problems. Oh, did I mention, by the way, that Hazard Control Technologies offers training services as well as consulting services, where we do training on bulk materials and the various hazards as well. So we would love to hear from you if you have interest in those areas. We know that today, as the world continues to change, that carbon monoxide monitoring is one of the most efficient ways to develop an understanding that something is beginning to burn or spontaneous combustion is occurring. A fire is in the development stages, long before the smoke and the monitoring of heat, often as carbon monoxide is being emitted. And we know the value of monitoring for carbon monoxide really is the ability to trend, to see the changes in the trend over a given time as an indicator that we got something happening and we need to address it sooner until to prevent bad things from happening. Hazard Control Technologies has on a piercing rod kit. It is commonly used on bulk material stockpiles. It's also used in those bin bunker hoppers and silos, predominantly to not only to do what we call some reversed hazard elimination, but also to deal with getting the minimum amount of liquid down to where the fire is the most efficient way with the greatest and the best results coming out of that. So that is a device that is available, used with that 500 encapsulating agent. Works extremely well because, again, the surface tension reduction, the cooling ability, the encapsulation of the carbon monoxide, and all the different molecular chemical levels that it's working on simultaneously, better than anything out there on the market today. Many facilities use dust collection, where they are collecting the dust from the processes and the equipment, separating it through air material separators, and then discharging either for reuse or disposal and so forth. Dust collectors, again, are very prone for fires and explosions if they're not well maintained, well detected. Again, detect, correct, and prevent philosophy in place. They are very known for those things to take place. As we see here on the left side is a dust collector that has explosion vents. It is properly designed for the material, and they control the release of that pressure, whereas the one on the right has no explosion vents. And as pressure builds up and is released, materials become very violent, very flying. The encapsulator, F500 encapsulator agent concentrate control system, commonly known as a CCS system, is often used in dust collectors of all types of fuels, using open nozzles both in the clean and dirty space. So we interact with fire protection engineers to design the concentrate control supply systems, introducing that 500 encapsulating agent within the system for the most effective, again, working on all levels of chemical and molecular levels for the greatest efficiency and the best results. Conveyor fires. Look at that move. That's fast, and that's real. Many have always thought that conveyor fires were what's on the belt that's burning, the fuel that you're moving, the wood, the coal, the paper, the rubber, whatever is where the problem is. Never realizing it's not only that, it's the belt itself. It's the stuff that's around it that falls off and accumulates. But when the fires do break out, they tend to move very quickly. And traditionally, bad design systems don't get it. It continues to spread. The goal is they're trying to slow progression down, but normally they're moving faster than they can. And generally with copious quantities of water. It is known through some various testing that the F500 extinguishing agent used in a controlled concentrate supply system, along with the water on a designed fire system with open nozzles, can more effectively extinguish and control the fire than with just plain water alone. And again, offering a lot of the benefits from the health and environmental standpoints equally as well. Coal mills and coal pulverizers over the years have been known to have explosions. And yeah, I know, some people call them puffs. Some people call them other things. They're a transient pressure excursion. It's an explosion, whatever you want to call it. It's not a good thing. They do happen. And you begin to think about it during a milling or a pulverizing function, you're reducing the size of particles. Often you've got airflow in there. It's being put in airborne conditions. and it just takes the heat and whatever, and you now have all the conditions for explosion to take place. Hazard Control Technologies in partnership, working with others, are in a relationship that they have developed a very proactive system for coal pulverizers and mills known as MillPro. It monitors for carbon monoxide and temperatures. It can very quickly introduce the agent into the thing at the minimum amount. It's all custom designed, all automatic. So often before an operator can even in a split second pick up that something's changing in there, it's already addressed the change. Again, another one of those elements putting a barrier in for human performance. So that is another system that is interactive and under collaboration with F500 encapsulating technologies and that. Well, one of my favorite topics, and I see my good friend Paul is joining us today. Glad you're here, Paul. Paul is a chair and most active in combustible dust on the NFPA and in various other levels, and very respected and incredible and most knowledgeable resource. I've learned a lot from him. Again, we're just going to touch on this very quickly as we've done webinars on it. We also have training that we need to do with it. But as we know that most combustible dust, solids and particles, most of those like coal and wood and aluminum and agricultural products and so forth over time can break down. And when they break down into dust, much smaller, dustier particles. They're very easily get airborne. And we have continued almost every week seeing different explosions and fire events around the world dealing with combustible dust. It's a very real, a very likely condition. And it happens in our electric and steam generating facilities as well. We know that there's 5 elements, just like there's 4 elements required to have a fire, known as the fire tetrahedron in short. We know there's 5 elements: fuel and oxygen and heat or ignition source. Keep in mind, often with the fuels that we're dealing with, that ignition source can just be spontaneous combustion, where it's going through its own chemical reaction, generally drawing moisture in that results in creation of heat. You put it in a confined environment, you get it dispensed in there, and you have all the conditions for an explosion to take place. Often what's worse than the initial explosion is what's known as the secondary, tertiary explosions. Those explosions generally are the dust that's outside of the process equipment or the particular equipment, like a dust collector or pulverizer or mill, whatever. And it's what's laying around out there that we've just become accustomed to being out there. And as it becomes airborne and all the conditions met, it triggers an explosion, creates more pressure waves, and more damaging results take place from that. As we talk about bulk materials and combustible dust, we do remind, as part of our ability to detect, correct, and to prevent, is the importance of the reverse hazard mitigation. It's really slowing things down, stopping to not contribute more dust. Inspect those areas all around, remove it, and there is a product called Dust Wash, is a product that works extremely well to minimize the amount of liquid to help capture that dust and encapsulate it and help it get rid of it, as well as render it non-flammable and non-combustible, to remove those from all the areas, including within inside the bins and so forth. And again, continuously monitoring. Those are some important steps and the first steps in dealing with those types of conditions once you detect something's taking place in that. I have rambled on for an hour now. And Ron, I know you are driving and listening, so I hope that we have not made you drowsy or anyone else. Any questions or comments this far before we continue more specifically into other hazards? Do we have any chats out there? Any chats? Not seeing any? We'll go ahead and continue. So let's take a journey down the area of looking at pressurized liquids and the oils and the transformers and lithium ion and some of those areas as we continue. Pressurized liquids and oils. We know that some of the common hazards are the turbine lube oil systems. Those are critical areas, and often those areas continue to pressurize and continue to flow atomized liquids in that until the equipment comes to complete rest, which is not normally very quickly. So turbine oils are protecting some of the most highly cost and most critical component of a steam electric generating facility in some cases. And as you see on the right side, you can see the devastation that takes place when things go bad to the turbine generator. Example of what happened within the last 2 weeks over in another country, and where they resulted in major power outages and tremendous high dollar loss as well. Pressurized liquids and oils are used on boiler feed pumps. They're used often to as part of the oil ignition system to be able to get the temperature up, to sustain flame and heat, to ignite the other solid fuels in the boiler before it's shut off. They're often used for black start or backup generators. So they are very prevalent in various forms in most every facility, from lubricating to hydraulic systems to others in that. When you have these types of fires, generally they become a three-dimensional fire. Like underneath the turbine, you have all kinds of piping and cable trays and structures and a lot of obstructions. And it creates that three-dimensional scenario that foams don't work well. Foams aren't designed for 2- and 3-dimensional fires. They're designed for those one-dimensional, that spill type of area, and even to be contained within that. What we do know through some testing performed under a National Fire Protection Association's fire research project, that we do confirm that F500 encapsulating technology works extremely well on the 2- and 3-dimensional fires. In fact, to the point that it needs less density than anything else. Much more efficient than water, and provide for a more healthy, safe, and helps get the people out, as well as control the situation again once something has gone bad. It's being used under turbine lube oil systems. It's being used on transformers. It's being used on many different areas where you have those lubricating systems where pressurization can be a function of failure. So what do we know about 3-dimensional Class B fires? Well, we know that in NFP 850, there are some specific sprinkler application densities suggested. We know that the approach really is to control the fire, not necessarily to truly extinguish the fire. We know that it's not necessarily effective on Class B fires, and there really is a potential, if it's dealing with the oil tanks or even transformers, of a boil over condition that blows it all over the place and really makes things bad. Foams, both Class A and Class B foams, regardless, they form a blanket trapping the heat, and they generally have to have a formation and maintain a blanket on a flat surface, which is not realistic on 3-dimensional fire. So they're really not suitable for a Class B fire. Encapsulating agents, again, encapsulate the hydrocarbons, the oils and so forth, rendering them non-flammable, non-ignitable. They have a very rapid and permanent heat reduction without steam, about 6 to 10 times greater heat reduction than water. And again, effective on 3D class fires. They've been actually effective again through the testing jointly with FDNY and Con Edison and others as well. The importance of how well they work even on transformer fires reinforces the merits of using it on any type of lubricating oil, three-dimensional fire, whatsoever it may be. Just some work that was done with Dominion Resources. One of the Dominion results that they identified, and again, they provided some backgrounds, is typically the recommendations by many have been a 0.40 GPM over a square foot. Density, we've actually found that with F500, or they should say they proved, as well as others, that 0.20 is much more faster and better, and that's what's really needed. So you're using less liquid, less runoff, less everything, but more efficient than other types of agents, including water. So it does really, again, highlight the merits of the values behind using that.
Hazard Control Technologies presents F500 encapsulator technology.
Lights the building. Hey, go, bring it! Hey, a little bit longer than
Right here, whether they're in municipal setting, industrial setting, or power plants, they're all
wait for it,
This is Rescue 441. We're hooking up another line.
but the challenges that we are all facing. And that was an exciting day on the golf course right there. But the point being is that when these fires erupt, and they are likely to erupt, the use of firefighting foam is generally not effective, whereas F500 encapsulating agent has a proven history of being very effective, both in the cooling as well as in the encapsulating, reducing the toxics, the smoke, that even the water runoff is biodegradable and not an environmental hazard that where foams and other agents and so forth present to itself. So again, transformers today, we're beginning to see more and more application because it works on all levels, and it works on, as you'll see this one, not only a Class B fire elevated, could be in any community today, but it works effectively on the wood pole and the vegetation around, again, covering all the bases with the least amount of agent out there. These are real conditions that take place in our communities, in our plants, in our facilities, and those of you on the call today are likely to face in your career, in your lifetime. And that's why it's important to know that hazard control technology has the solution. It's the F500 encapsulating agent, the technology, the appliances, the consulting services, the training, support to allow you to do what you do safely, healthily, and environmentally responsible.
Hazard Control Technologies
This is
presents
some testing that was
F500
again done.
encapsulator technology.
We'd like to share with you. This is actually being delivered at 3% solution.
We're at the Philadelphia Electric Company fire training grounds where F500 is being used to extinguish an electrical transformer fire. F500 is fed at 3% into the sprinkler deluge system utilizing 10 5-gallon per minute heads. The fire is quickly knocked down to include the running surface fire by the indirect spray from the heads.
So that's a classic example of what you can see with just a few heads and a little bit of F500 encapsulating agent, how well it effectively controlled that fire with the least amount of residual and the most effective.
10, 11, 10.
I do remind you, if you would, if you haven't done so,
1200 degrees.
feel free to type your name and your email in the chat box.
200.
And by doing so, we will make sure that you get a
Fire's
copy of
out.
the presentation and supporting materials. And also, if you have some questions or even comments, we would welcome you to type those in the chat feature anytime. Once again, the effectiveness of F500 encapsulating
Fire's out.
clean water is just proven time after time after time by very many different research facilities across the globe today. This is one that I think is extremely interesting. And I recall again, as I said earlier, about my father talked about things about having to have stuff and how expensive it was to have all these different agents for different purposes, whether it was a wetting agent, whether it was foam and the different types of foam you needed based on polar, non-polar, and alcohol, non-alcohol, and all that mind-boggling stuff you had to do out there. And how all that stuff over time, when you began to add it all together, was not only a lot of it and expensive, but then you always question, do I have enough? And often that question was, no, I need more. Well, here's a comparison of a real situation. On the right, Duke had a transformer fire. It took well over 6 hours to extinguish, involving multiple fire departments, 400 gallons of AFFF with 50,000 gallons of water. The overall cost for just the agent alone was around the $8,000 mark. Who knows what the cleanup cost, because again, all that liquid, that water and so forth, and all that runoff and the oils all have to be contained and cleaned up and so on and so forth. But the agent cost itself was $8,000 plus. Then we go back on the left and look at Alabama Power. See, Alabama Power went through the process of continual improvement. They detected a concern. They worked to correct it in order to prevent it. And they put a F500 encapsulating agent control concentrates supply system on their fire system for the transformer. And when they had the big oops, the thing went wrong. It took 3 minutes and 10 seconds to extinguish the fire without any firefighter's response. They used 3 gallons of F500 and about 100 gallons of overall solution, less than $100. Very minimal cleanup that was needed for it, because again, F500 encapsulating agent is biodegradable and recognized even by the US EPA as a soil remediation agent, compared to well over $8,000 for AFFF. Wow. Mind-boggling. And look at the economics on top of it all. You can buy the best and save money. So again, encapsulator agent solutions, we do have the control concentrate supply system. It's used on transformers, both your main transformers, GSUs, auxiliary transformers, substations, switch yards. It's really applicable anywhere. It's used on turbines. It's used on some critical coal handling areas, not only within the fuel handling areas like conveyors, but sometimes even in bunkers and silos and bins. Again, that type of system can be very effective on lube oil systems for boiler feed pumps, for turbine generators, just a powerful system to do many wonderful things that take the human element out of it and is recognized as a highly efficient, successful there. There are also portable delivery systems like the turbo cannon, and there's trailers and skid units available where you could use for direct application of transformer fires or other types of scenarios, and even manual firefighting where it can be used. And by the way, no special nozzles needed like it does with foam. So there's another savings in cost with foams. They make bubbles. You have to aerate that. You have to have a special nozzle to do all that. F500 not required in that. Okay, let's look at some other areas. We see these as what I think of in terms of rapidly developing, demanding hazards. In this changing world that we continuously live in, we're seeing some pretty big changes. We have now began to recognize the increased frequency and severity of 2 and 3D pressurized oil hazards. Turbine generators, I said, just a real massive one just within the last couple of weeks. And that we have energy storage systems, battery energy storage systems becoming more and more in play. Lithium ion, not only used for these battery energy storage systems, but used in our life everywhere, whether it's from communication, whether it's from powering our scooter, to powering our phone, to powering our home, to powering whatever we need power for, to taking the power from solar and wind and storing it for later use. We're seeing that massively growing in our world around us. We know, just for example, on vehicles, now there's more and more plastics, there's batteries, there's lithium ion, there's magnesium steering columns and magnesium frames and high voltage stuff on them. Our hazards are rapidly changing on what we use to get around today, and we'll continue to do that. And yet, with all of that, we know that the F500 encapsulating agent works, again, on the chemical molecular level on every one of these efficiently, quickly, with the least impact on harm to people and to the environment.
Hazard Control Technologies presents F500 encapsulator technology.
This is just kind of reinforced.
In November 2015, one of the recycling buildings belonging to Inmetco, the International Metals Reclamation Company, burnt to the ground. Inmetco is a big recycler of lithium-ion batteries. The batteries started the fire, which spread into other areas. Firefighters worked on other materials in the building but could not extinguish the batteries. They needed a solution.
You don't have a screen. Okay, you got it now.
Yeah, it's flood. Like he's put 20 gallons.
There's going to be a little conversation
and what
here,
you have
just
it on
to sum up the conversation.
He's not even putting 20
It's
gallons.
typical what fire instructors like to say. Hey, let's get those batteries hot. Let's get some excitement and get them blowing up and popping.
Officials from Inmetco were on hand to
good
witness
fire.
the power of F500 encapsulator agent on lithium-ion battery fires. The assorted batteries provided by Inmetco included both lithium batteries and lithium-ion batteries. The lithium batteries are a Class D combustible metal fire.
Using a 20-gallon per minute nozzle. Extremely quick.
Applying plain water to lithium will
see not
create explosions
only
as the high
the
temperatures
use of that
cause the
nozzle,
hydrogen
known as
and
a
oxygen to
TKO
separate
nozzle,
into
but
explosive
you'll see
gases.
that
Also,
quickly
water
controls
evaporates
it,
to remove heat,
encapsulates,
which is very
lowers,
inefficient.
watch the black
Adding just
smoke,
3%
watch
of
the smoke
F500
as it
encapsulator
changes,
agent forms a
and
protective
wow,
skin around the
how
droplets,
effective
preventing
that is
evaporation and
compared
causing
to the
heat to be absorbed.
copious amounts of
F500
water
EA can
that
be
would
applied directly to
required,
Class
and
D
still
metal
not
fires
cool.
without dangerous flare-ups or explosions. The
So
heat
it
is
shows
rapidly
here
absorbed.
shortly. Again, they got to let it burn.
You want to wait
Gotta
for
get a little
it.
bit hotter.
Let it burn. You want to burn? Last time you guys
Before
get
they
here,
apply
they're ripping. All right, hold on a second. That's fine. I'm just making sure I got 8.
I know typically most nozzles are the 95 GPM and so forth. This is just very good, useful tool. For car fires and any other type of fire scenarios, where you get the fast knockdown, fast control of the vapors and the toxins.
You can see and hear the batteries exploding.
Non-flammable, non-ignitable. Hey, now we're starting to get a bit of fireworks going here. Starting to get smoke. Batteries going. That instructor is saying, well, a little bit more. Need a little bit more. Again, this is what we find in our vehicles today, many electric vehicles. This is what we find all over the world as our rapidly increasing hazard. They are going to open up the nozzle and apply a little bit. They're getting at the 20 GPM nozzle at 500. Look how that smoke is going very quickly black, encapsulating those vapors, encapsulating those gases, and extinguishment in just a matter of seconds. Yes, I did say seconds. Compared to what copious amounts of water
using a TKO
may
nozzle at 20
much longer and never
GPM, the fire was out in just over a minute and used
let
less
alone
than 2
control that
quarts of
thermal
F500
runaway
encapsulator
and the
agent.
hydrogen fluoride that's being generated
I'm just going to go until we empty the bottle.
and the temperature of the rack.
20 gallons a minute. I don't know if anybody's timing how long it's been. Yeah, your camera is.
As I mentioned earlier, Hazard Control Technologies does offer consulting and training services. Many electric and steam generating facilities have found it very valuable for their services dealing with coal handling and rubber and biomass and dust hazard analysis and working in the support them in the consulting side with emergency preparedness and response and planning, helping you be prepared to be able to respond should the undesired ever take place. Training packages and courses span everywhere from combustible dust hazards to bulk solid hazards to coal handling hazards to various emergency response functions out there today. So we do have a very wide range of
Where is the moment we need it the most? You kick up the leaves and the magic is lost. Tell me your blue skies fade to gray. Tell me your passion's gone away. And I don't need no carrying on. Stand in the line just to hit a new low. You're faking a smile with the coffee to go. And tell me your life's been way offline. You fall into pieces every time. And I don't need no carrying on. 'Cause you had a bad day. You take it.
So before you get knocked in the head and bad things happen to good people, this is a good opportunity to look at the conditions and look at the hazards. And we've mentioned many of them, although not totally inclusive of all hazards. But the common denominator in all of it, as we go about our efforts to detect our potential hazards and to correct those hazards, or at least mitigate them to the best of our ability, to be prepared to be able to respond when things happen. I hope that at the end, one thing is clear, that the most effective, the most efficient way, and the one that handles the development of new technologies and new hazards and new issues in our emerging markets today is that with the F500 encapsulating agent and its technology, working on all chemical molecular levels, on all angles of that fire tetrahedron, on classes of fires out there, being efficient and helping us reduce the hazards to human health, to the environment, to the firefighters and facility fire brigade members, to the employees, and helping our business be sustainable and survivable. With that said, are there questions? Are there comments? Not hearing any questions. Again, if something strikes you later today or tomorrow or the next day, please reach out to us and we would be happy to talk with you and help you and support you. We hope that you have found today's webinar informative and helpful to you in all that you do. Again, thanks everyone.